Will Matheson here, and today I'm going to spec out a brand new PC that will run Windows 11, play games at low settings, leave lots of headroom for upgrades, and not cost a heck of a lot. Now, if you want me to actually build this PC, like this video and share it, and if I hit 1,000 subscribers by November 15th, I will build this computer, or something very similar. Also, I'm in Canada, but I'll tell you my reasoning for picking particular parts, and you can adapt this to your local market conditions. Now, since I'm in Canada, I'm going to go to ca.pcpartpicker.com, but you can also just go to www.pcpartpicker.com and select your country from the drop-down. You might also want to create an account so you can save your builds and refer to them later. Anyway, let's go to System Builder. First, we need to pick a CPU. Now, what I like to filter by first is SMT, that is, simultaneous multi-threading. I feel like there's no excuse for not offering 2 logical threads per physical core in 2021. So if there's no SMT, or hyperthreading as Intel calls it, I don't want to hear about it. Oops. That's what we want. And now we'll go and sort by price. Today, it looks like our budget CPU is going to be the Intel Xeon E5-2687W V3 with 10 cores, 160 watts, that's toasty, and 50, okay, we're gonna hit this price thing again. All right, there we go. It looks like our budget CPU is going to be the AMD Athlon 3000G, a 2-core 4-thread processor with Vega 3 integrated graphics. I think the Pentium Gold G6400 would be a fine choice as well, but it's more expensive right now, and the Athlon's onboard Vega 3 is probably going to perform at least slightly better than the Pentium's onboard UHD 610. Then after that, you're into a couple of older Sandy Bridge Xeons, and building something from old server or old high-end desktop parts is a viable strategy, but you will need to supply some sort of discrete GPU, and it's going to be more challenging overall, and PC Part Picker isn't really the greatest for server parts yet. Not to mention, your system would not be supported for Windows 11. Oh, we also have here a 1st Gen Core i3. Oof. So I think we're going AMD today, but I'd like to see them get some Zen 3-based Ryzen 3 with graphics out to retail, and maybe put out a newer Athlon too. But the Athlon 3000G is of the Zen Plus microarchitecture, and so you will see it on Microsoft's list of CPUs supported for Windows 11. Anyway, so we picked the CPU, and it comes with a cooler, so we can skip that, but of course you can upgrade that later. And now we're on to the motherboard. So we sort by price again, and we get an A320 motherboard at the top. Now, 300 series boards can be made to work with our 3000G, but they are very likely to require a BIOS update. PC Part Picker will try to alert you, but the A-series chipsets do not support overclocking, and these inexpensive boards at any rate are not going to support the fancy CPU-free BIOS updating that we're starting to see. AMD does offer a loaner CPU program, but look, for just $10 more, we can get a B450 board that will support the 3000G from the get-go. And look, you can even run Zen 3 CPUs with a BIOS update. So if you want to run Cyberpunk 2077 on a VGA monitor with a Model M PS2 keyboard, BioStar has you covered. I'm surprised there isn't a floppy controller on this thing. But you do get HDMI, thank goodness. No DisplayPort though, so definitely no DisplayPort daisy chaining, which could be useful to some people. But if you buy a discrete GPU down the road, the onboard video won't matter anymore except for diagnostic purposes, as long as your CPU still has its own graphics. And you also get built-in TPM 2.0 support. One drawback for this board, though, is that you only get 2 memory slots. Since most consumer stuff is limited to 2 memory channels anyway, that's not a performance constraint, but it might be a cash flow issue. I strongly recommend a 2x8 kit so that you'll have 16 gigs of RAM in dual channel. If you can't afford that, you could run with a single 8 gig stick and buy a second one later. But if you had a 4-slot board, you could buy a 2x4 kit and have 8 gigs in dual channel, and then buy another 2x4 kit and have your 16 gigs in dual channel, 2 sticks per channel. Speaking of memory, another thing to consider is that Ryzen is known to benefit from fast RAM, and that will help our graphics situation too, since part of the main memory will be used for graphics memory. If we jump onto Wikichip, we see that the 3000G supports up to DDR4 3200, and so does the board we picked. So we want to look at 3200 or better, and the 2x8 kits. All right, so we want to go into memory, and we want 3200 or better. And for the modules, we want to look at 2x8s, and I suppose also 2x16s for those of you who never close your browser tabs. And we'll sort by price. Now, I have a confession to make. I've never bothered to look at the qualified vendor lists or QVLs when purchasing memory. I just go by spec. I've always gotten away with it. But if this is a concern to you, you can try to shop for an exact type that the board manufacturer lists. The problem is that the manufacturers are limited in their ability to continually test new memory with older boards, and also to test any but the most well-known brands. You might also want to look at the timings. This is measuring latency or delay, and not speed directly, so lower is better. So looking at the timings here, I happen to know there is such an animal as a 1431 kit. Now look there, if you want to spend more than $200 on your RAM, you can definitely do it. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to go with a couple of pretty blue sticks to add to our build. Storage. We want an NVMe SSD. SATA would be fine too, but if your board has a PCIe M.2 slot, which ours does, it makes sense to populate it with an NVMe solid-state drive. Now sort by price, and it looks like we can get a 500 gigabyte unit pretty close to the top, which will hold your OS and some games. But if you're going to buy or have access to other drives for bulk storage, you could instead get a 128 gigabyte drive or 256 gigabytes for just $1 less. Nice. And if you go for a SATA SSD, make sure you get one with a cache. With NVMe, this isn't as necessary because NVMe drives can use your main memory thanks to their host memory buffer feature. So right now, the first one up from the bottom of the ladder with a cache is this Crucial MX500, but it's only 250 gigs, and it's only slightly less expensive than the 500 gig NVMe drive we picked out. Video card. Well, we don't need one with this build, but you might want one later. Let's look at the RTX range, for example. Here, for example, is a MSI Ventus 2X RTX 3060 card for the low price of $1,067.34. But right now, we're just setting up a basic platform, so we're not going to burden ourselves with this right now. Case. Technically, you could run this out of a pizza box, but let's splurge and get a safe home for our parts. You're going to want to read the reviews to get a feel for how difficult the cases might be to work with and how good the airflow is. Anyway, in general, I would recommend something with a mesh front panel and that comes with fans included. Also consider internal bays for storage and even external bays if you want to add a DVD or Blu-ray drive. Since we have a micro ATX board, if you want a compact case, you can get a micro ATX case. Just to review the three sizes you see most often, from small to big, they go mini ITX, then micro ATX, then standard ATX. You can put smaller boards in bigger cases, but you can't put bigger boards in smaller cases because geometry. You can put smaller boards in bigger cases, but you can't put bigger boards in smaller cases. But there is nothing stopping you from doing something ridiculous like having a mini ITX board and an ATX full tower, but you obviously can't do the reverse. So as I said, I would like to see something with both front and rear pre-installed fans. One that does is the DIY PC MA01. And another that does is the Rosewill Line M. Now, if you want something with a tempered glass side panel, we will just tick that off. You might try the Antec NX310. No external bays on this one, though. So if you want that, maybe go for the Cooler Master Box NR400. Ah, yes. That's going to be my choice. Power supply. You can actually get a modest power supply included in certain cases, which might be a good idea for something like a home theater PC build. But we're going to get something decently efficient, 80 plus bronze or better, with a little overhead so we can support a graphics card later, or potentially a beefier CPU. This Deepcool DA-N gives us 600 watts for $44.99. You don't see another 600 watt on the list until you get down to the Thermaltake Tough Power GX1 for $59.88. But you might want to spring for a modular power supply so that you only have to deal with the cables you actually need for the components you have, and you can keep the excess cables in the box that your power supply came in. So let's tick off modular. Full modular. Semi-modular, you'll get like your main cables bundled up, but you'll have modulars for everything else. But let's go full modular. I was going to put in the Be Quiet Straight Power 11 with 80 plus gold and 650 watts for $79.88, and it's got good reviews. But it might be a problem with this case. Also, you're not realistically going to be putting a 5950X and an RTX 3080 into this build. So let's go with the 500 watt Cougar LX for $59.88. Operating system. If you want Windows, go on to Kingwin or something similar and buy a key. I've once had a key not work, but I was able to get a refund from the vendor, and I can still recommend this. It's definitely gray market, but you'll be able to have your Windows fully activated. Alternatively, just go and download Ubuntu 2004 LTS. You can get Steam and even many Windows games running now. Monitor. Now sure, you could buy a new monitor, but you could also find a perfectly serviceable VGA LCD or even CRT on the secondhand market. But since you asked, if you're going to buy something new, it should be able to handle 1080p at a high refresh rate. TN panels were the first kinds of LCDs widely available, and they suffer from limited viewing angles and color reproduction, but they have low latency and can support high refresh rates. IPS is superior in terms of angles and color, but they can get more expensive at lower latencies. Finally, there are VA and PVA panels, which you see a lot in TVs. They have really amazing contrast ratios, good color reproduction, though not as good as IPS. They're okay for viewing angles, but not as good as IPS, and they're really not as good on latency. So we are going to be looking at IPS, as well as PLS and AHVA, which are intended to compete with IPS. Okay, fine. We'll check OLED too. But let's be real here, we're not buying an OLED on our budget. We'll also look for 1 millisecond or better response time. Yeah, so the first OLED to meet this criteria is just about $5,300, and only 60 Hertz, though you do get 4K. So let's scroll way back up, and look, we have an MSI Optics G241 1080p monitor, 23.8 inches, 144 Hertz, 1 millisecond response time, $239.99. Beauty. But again, I actually do recommend the secondhand market for this and other peripherals like your mouse, keyboard, and speakers. So if we have that monitor, we're at $648.01 Canadian and $408.02 without it. Do keep in mind that in Canada, a PS5 digital is supposed to go for $499.99, and if you could get one, it would run circles around this PC, having 8 Zen 2 cores instead of 2 Zen Plus cores, and 36 RDNA 2 compute units instead of 3 Vega units. And I have this here just to show you that like you can just go completely bonkers and still be on this same motherboard. You know, you might just want a upgrade your motherboard too. You know, those voltage regulation modules might not be up to the 5950X, but you could do it. But you know, it might be fun to build this. So if I can get to 10,000 subs by the end of the year, seriously, I need to get my car fixed. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. What would you do differently? What's the market like in your country? If I do build this, what games do you want me to play? I guarantee Minecraft will be one of them. Thanks for watching.